Welcome to Classroom 5.0, the podcast where we explore the future of work, learning, and leadership. I'm your host, Mariane Power, clinical psychologist, speaker, and consultant on meaningful work-life design and neurodiversity. Here's a question for you. Did you know that over 53% of professionals in fields like tech identify as neurodivergent? We've all heard about the challenges, but what about the untold stories of success? In NeuroPeak, Season 5 of the podcast, we're flipping the script. I'm sitting down with visionary leaders to reveal the strategies and strengths that power peak performance in neurodivergent professionals. If you're ready to discover how our community thrives beyond a diagnosis, you're in the right place. Let's dive on in to today's episode. Dr. Shohreh, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be diving into all things about the brain, exploring some neuroscience with you today. But before we get kicking into learning all about neurotransmitters and synapses and what's going on in these brains of ours, I'd love if you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure, Mariane. First of all, it's my pleasure, absolute pleasure to be with you. I'm a lecturer at Flinders University, and also I'm working with the Council of Ambulance Authorities around Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea. So my major background is in neuroscience, and also I have done some research about brain pathology, different situations, including Alzheimer's disease, dementia, brain aging, and also during health situations, also different aspects of mental health. Yes, and apart from that, I love to bring the science, neuroscience, to the life of people in the practical setting and to help them improve their professional and personal lives, to know how to use that amazing organ of ours like brain to get the best of it for their lives, in their daily lives, in different challenges that we all facing.
I know a lot of our listeners, for example, are ADHD or who are exploring different neurodivergent profiles.
Yes.
And there's all this talk out in the literature, and a lot of our listeners are scrolling through TikTok or Instagram, hearing about dopamine, neurotransmitters, executive function, and not really understanding what all of these things are. Talk to me about neurotransmitters and the role they play.
Definitely. There is a big list of different types of neurotransmitters inside the brain, which, as you said, a few of them are really important in particular situation. So, for example, talking about decision making. So, in the brain, there are different parts which are involved in making decisions, planning for the future, attention, solving problems, and so on. And the big important part of the brain, which is in charge of decision making and planning, is placed just before your forehead. Here we call it prefrontal cortex. And the chemicals, or the scientific term, as you mentioned, neurotransmitters, which are involved in that decision-making process and planning and attention, there are a few of them, but the most important one is dopamine. And dopamine is a very important neurotransmitter. It's involved in different functions of the brain. One of them is, which is a very important one, is a reward system. And reward system is the thing that this is the base of learning for humans and also for other animals. And dopamine is in the brain considered as a reward neurotransmitter. So when I get the present from my parents because I got a good grade in school or did a good job, the dopamine surge in my brain and it starts giving me the sense of pleasure. And that's why I do that thing again, because I love that sense of pleasure and I love that boost of dopamine. About the dopamine, has another important role in the prefrontal cortex about decision making and about attention. So people who are making big decisions about their futures, personal lives, professional lives, they need to use dopamine. So dopamine in those situations, dopamine surge in the brain and starts helping the prefrontal cortex to make proper decision. Another important role of dopamine, especially for people who are facing challenges in focusing on something, like people with ADHD or some people with like different spectrum of autism. This is because of a part of it, actually, not all of it. A part of it is because of alteration in the level of dopamine in their brains. Because dopamine is very important neurotransmitter to make the brain focus on something. And then when you focus on something, the level of dopamine again surges. And then make sure that you are doing that particular task and you're focusing on that particular task. So for some patients, with some people, I can say with ADHD, the level of dopamine is not that high as the other people, and then that's why they have a little bit of challenges in focusing on some particular tasks. So this is the dopamine that here matters. Of course, there are other neurotransmitters and there are other areas of the brain which are involved in this, because brain is such a
Complex.
complicated. Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
not one part is working independently. All of them need to work totally all together in one symphony.
You mentioned ADHD, and I have a personal interest in this, as our listeners know. I'm ADHD myself and combined, and I'm really interested in the literature. I wanted to check in with you on your expertise in this space about whether it's a dopamine deficit per se or a difference in distribution.
So it is about dopamine partly, but as I mentioned,
Okay.
it is not totally about dopamine. So there are some connections between different types of neurochemicals or neurotransmitters inside the brain. So
Mm.
I give you one example about, for example, norepinephrine. So norepinephrine, as we call it, noradrenaline in England,
Hmm.
this is another important neurotransmitter inside the brain, and not inside the brain because we also have it as a hormone, which is different. And this is the chemical
Where it
which
gets
is
tricky.
released somewhere else inside the body, not the brain, but it's still
Uh-huh.
important. So noradrenaline actually works in a symphony with dopamine.
Hmm.
However, its role is a little bit different, and the norepinephrine acts like a filter for us. So imagine you're sitting in a room full of noises, and then you
Hmm.
want to concentrate in one particular task or one particular noise, one particular voice. So imagine like a lecture theater, and the students are talking a little bit here
Hmm.
and there, and one lecturer is talking to you, and you want to concentrate on what the lecturer telling you, not concentrate on the other one,
Hmm.
other people's talking to you. So that's the role of norepinephrine. This way, norepinephrine comes to the play and start filtering the other unwanted noises. Somehow that the brain is able to just target to the voice of the lecturer. People with ADHD, due to this imbalance between norepinephrine and dopamine,
Hmm.
they somehow lack that focus and targeted attention. So
Mm.
this way, because norepinephrine is not in that level, then they are not able to filter the noises. So that's why when they are in a little bit noisy environment, they get overwhelmed, and then they cannot focus on one particular person. Again, dopamine sometimes comes to help and try to overtake if the dopamine level is good. But because in ADHD there are different levels for all of those neurotransmitters, so a little bit
Mm.
less dopamine, a little bit less norepinephrine, sometimes they cannot cover each other's role, and then that's why the lack of pay attention or the lack of a targeted focus on something happens.
Thank you. It's not just one, is it? It's really, I think I heard someone describe it as having an orchestra. So you've got all these different neurotransmitters, and imagine that they've all got different instruments. And so what pulls the orchestra together? It's the conductor at the band. But when the
Sure.
conductor's not there and we're all just
Sounds
sitting
nice.
here, playing our clarinets and our saxophones and our violins, it's a cacophony of noise. And I certainly know for periods of time for myself that selective filter really does struggle. And so that's where having different environmental conditions help me
Exactly.
personally, at least, to be able to get the right connections, whatever happens there for my brain, but it's figuring out what the environment is for you. Okay, great. So we've covered those two key neurotransmitters that we talk a lot about. And I know that there's many more. You mentioned serotonin, and that's
Yeah.
impacted in terms of our mood as well. They all play together.
Yes.
One of the other questions that I know our audience is really interested in is the role of hormones. So the difference between hormones and neurotransmitters, and particularly for women in different hormonal stages of life. So I'm thinking, for example, perimenopause, menopause, and even adolescence, postpartum, for example. What's going on with this play between estrogen and then dopamine, and why sometimes women report almost ADHD-like symptoms or cognitive differences during these particular hormonal phases? What's happening in the brain?
That's a very good question. You're totally right. So during, particularly for women, during perimenopause or menopause, or even during puberty, so the
Hmm.
level of the hormones are changing, and the difference between hormones and neurotransmitters is usually basically first the place that they are released. So whatever we
Okay.
call as neurotransmitters, they are released inside the nervous system, including either brain or spinal cord.
Hmm.
While when we call as hormones, they're usually, some of them are still released in the brain, but mostly they are released somewhere outside of the brain by some glands in the body. So the other glands that we have, for example, thyroid in here, so and it
Hmm.
starts releasing thyroid hormones like thyroxine and different things. So those are hormones, and the hormones will go directly to the bloodstream, and then they go through the blood circulation. They go to the different parts of the body, and then they start going to the destination, to the target tissue, and they start showing their effects. So during
Mm.
puberty, we have the surge in two main hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And these two hormones actually will be in charge of having different effects, such as ovulation, such as
Mhm.
showing the bringing the sexual appearance of the women the way that it is. And during premenopause, those hormones start to fluctuate a little bit. So they are not dropping 100% the same way that they dropped in menopause, but premenopause is starting the time of starting fluctuation in those hormones. So they are not having the status that they had during the age premenopause. So, for example, one fluctuation is in estrogen hormone. Estrogen is a very important hormone doing different jobs, important jobs, not just about the female specific related jobs, but also in the brain. So, working on the neurons in combination with the other neurotransmitters, and one of them is dopamine. So, the studies showed that actually estrogen can increase the level of dopamine, which is really good, and then it helps to boost the dopamine whenever we need it during focus attention, particular attention during focus time, during planning, during everything. So when we need dopamine to surge, a surgeon can help and actually bring the dopamine to the level that we wanted. Also, progesterone has another important hormone in this area, including mood regulation. And that's
Mhm.
what we see during premenopause and a little bit higher level during menopause, when those estrogen and progesterone start to fall dramatically.
Yeah.
Then we don't have that much effect of estrogen and progesterone in dopamine. And recalling from the role of dopamine in focusing,
Mhm.
attention, decision making, all of those
Mhm.
things, when you need to have the surge of dopamine, estrogen is always a help. And when you don't have it, or you don't have it at the enough level, that means that dopamine is lacking some support from estrogen side. So when you need it
Yeah.
to get up when you're focusing, you cannot have it that much high. That's why women in perimenopause start experiencing some symptoms, such as they cannot focus as sharp as they used to be, and then they
Mm.
bring it somehow to the other people that, oh, I don't know what's wrong with me,
Yeah.
or
I'm
some.
losing my keys all of a sudden. I've got that tip of the tongue feeling where I just can't quite get my words out. And yesterday I knew what that name was. I hear a lot from women. I think I'm losing my mind. And if you don't know what's going on in your brain in terms of, well, the fact that dopamine is relying on estrogen and all of a sudden estrogen starts dropping off. And if you don't understand that about the natural flow and rhythm of your body, I can understand why a lot of women turn around and say, what is wrong with me? Am I getting dementia? Is this early onset Alzheimer's? You must hear this all the time.
Exactly, I've heard it a lot. They're like, when I'm working with people with Alzheimer's disease, and then the people who are concerned of
Mm,
having Alzheimer's disease or not, lots of women, they come to me and they say, I think I'm losing my memory because I cannot
yeah.
remember, I cannot focus, I cannot remember. And I said, like, what's your age and what is the other symptoms? And then I realized that they are going through premenopause and menopause. And I understand that
Mm,
it is absolutely, this is totally normal. It takes a while. After a while, they get better, and that is a little bit surprising for them, that they're going through like a little bit of less focus, less memory, and they're getting better because the brain luckily has that ability to adjust to that change and alteration.
I
So
didn't know that. Okay, that's
yeah.
interesting because of, yeah, okay. So tell me more about that. Like, what's that adjustment phase all about?
So usually it happens to the brain all the time, that when you are kind of depriving the brain from some sort of thing, it's a shock to it. first of all. So what's happening is, for example, if the level of estrogen is getting down, and then the brain used to that support from estrogen or progesterone to bring the dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. Serotonin is another important hormone, which is happy hormone called, and then it is under the influence of estrogen a lot and progesterone basically. And then it's lack of less, not totally lack, but the less amount of them, and that's a shock to the brain. So where is that support? So that's why it starts losing focus. It starts showing some symptoms of down mood or something like that. But luckily, the brain has the ability to adjust itself. So when the time goes on and this less estrogen, progesterone keeps going, the brain starts working on itself. Those dopamine neurons, the neurons which are in charge of releasing dopamine, to adjust themselves. To say, okay, I have the lack of this, and this is actually through actual physical and chemical processes, which is called downregulation or upregulation of receptors, means that the receptors, the receivers of those neurotransmitters, those dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, then they start making more of those receivers to grab every piece of estrogen that they can find. This way, if there is even less estrogen in the environment, they can grab all of them by the time, and then they can adjust themselves this way. So long story short, before that, they have, for example, is just a very inaccurate numbers. I'm just saying as a number. They had 100 receivers for those molecules of estrogens, and they work on them. Now estrogens dropping, they start making more receivers, thousands of them. They can this way pick up every single one molecules of estrogen in the environment. This way they adjust themselves somehow. They may not be able to adjust themselves within like a week or a month, but more they make, more they work on this adjustment procedure. That's why the women start bringing back their memory level if they are not having any of those dementia things, which 96% of the women. So then they start adjusting themselves, and then they say, oh, and my focus is coming back, my memory is coming back, my attention is coming back. So that's the ability. Brain is so adaptable.
That is fascinating. And so is there an argument then for having a little bit of patience with ourselves as women, to wait for the brain to adjust itself? I know that there's sort of a tendency to rush and say, oh, wow, here I am in this season of life. There must be a medication. There must be a treatment. There must be a hormone replacement, which, by the way, I'm all for all of that, and very relevant if that is the case for you. But it sounds like sometimes that there's a little bit of a life stage flow and a course correction that the brain is, for some, capable of. I'm guessing not for all, but capable of. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, you're right. No, absolutely agree. Couldn't agree more, actually. So first of all is coming the understanding of the situation. So you have to give that information to the people, to the public, to know that, okay, this is the situation which is happening. There is nothing
This is a
wrong with
biology.
you. Exactly. This is the absolute biology that everybody goes through it.
Yes.
And also, if not even men, women, we are talking about women, but men also going through alteration of their hormones when they age. So, but this is not very much popular in the terms of discussion as we discuss about women. But then you can also add up some, I can say, maybe strategies or tools that you can work on your brain. For example, if you work on your brain, if you start some mental activities such as reading, such as different things, that's going to help your brain to be more active. Those receptors, those receivers, they're gonna be built even in a faster speed. So there are strategies, there are actual scientific ways that you can fasten this situation and then bring that mood, attention, everything back to a little bit better level that you expect.
Great. Let's go there, because I've got two thoughts. One is, I would suggest that see, my brain's going in a dichotomous way here. On the one hand, it's saying there's a lot of talk to say, be self-compassionate, understand that this is what's happening, kick back, relax, the brain's going to take care of itself. And now I'm also hearing you share, actually, this is when we want to get gritty and we want to understand how to really be rigorous about exercising our brain and giving it the food and the fuel that it needs to be able to, pull all those synapses back into place, those neurotransmitters, get them all active and get back to a baseline that maybe is a new baseline. Is there room for both? Is one or the other? What would you say about maybe more of that self-compassion, take it slow, kick back versus let's get active?
A little bit of both, I can say.
Okay. Yeah.
Start with that understanding that this is a normal process of life. So this is the normal stage that you're going through. There is nothing wrong with you. Of course, it's a good idea to, if some people they have frequent episodes of memory loss or something, there is a good idea to always discuss this with a physician. But
Yeah.
99% this is not the case. It is the case that you're going through a normal stage of your life. This is happening, so this is understanding. So this way we actually take that scary part away from the women. Something's wrong with you. The second one is, of course, definitely you need to work on your brain, same as every other organ, like same as muscles. So we don't have the same amount of volume of muscles at 70 the same way that we have it at 20. So that is the brain is going through different phases, and it's totally normal. So you need to keep going and keep working on the brain, two different areas: one physical, one mental. And by physical I mean actual physical workouts, because
Okay. Exercise and moving.
exercising
Yeah.
exercising, working out is not just about muscles. It's actually increase the circulation into the body, and then the circulation goes to the brain. And actually there are lots of a big literature showing that the more you do work out during aging, that's gonna better support your brain circulation. The risk of all of those conditions that you face during aging will be like to the half or even less.
Yeah,
Mental
amazing.
situation, yeah, definitely, that's important, really important. As I said, like because people always think that, oh, okay, I need to lose weight, I need to lose fat, I need to do. It's not just, it is good, but not just about this part. It is about
Yeah,
also
protecting
the
your
part
brain.
over the shoulder, the brain. And also
Yeah.
mental activity is important, because you need to
Yes.
do some readings and watching TV, scrolling down your phone. This is not mental activity. I don't
No.
count it as mental activity. The thing that your brain needs to focus on it, for example, reading a book. And everybody has a passion: reading a book, painting, playing an musical instrument, I don't know, writing about something, doing even gardening, some activities that brain needs to do, something that think about it, making something, whatever that suits for you.
Active, so keeping the brain on and actively engaged in something as opposed to passive, like
Exactly.
watching TV or scrolling through your phone.
No,
Is there a
no.
challenge point so if we're thinking about particularly these seasons where we're wanting to increase the functionality of the brain, is there a challenge point that's a bit of a sweet spot? Do we want to feel like there's a stretch goal attached, or it's more just about the active engagement?
Active engagement is important, but I consider it as the baseline. Then again,
Okay.
start with that one and then see how far you can go. And I found it, actually, based on my experience, I found it fascinating that I see people is going automatically without any motivation from outside. They go to the upper level. So when they learn something, and because and the reward system is activated, and they know, oh, I
Yeah.
learned something that I couldn't think of, and I couldn't know that I can do it, and then I know I can do it, and then that is fascinating. So I go to learn something else. For example, if they, I don't know, they that is my thing, like a jigsaw puzzle. So when you make a small jigsaw puzzle, and it's such a rewarding thing, and then you just go and buy one more, and then start doing the second one.
Yeah.
The good thing about the brain is when that reward system and that dopamine level, actually, this is the way that you can manually increase the dopamine level in your brain. Even if I have ADHD and I want
Yeah.
to help myself in the level, in the terms of dopamine activation, I can do it. I just literally, I may need some kinds of medication, and that's totally fine. But apart from that, I can do something that is just my way to increase my dopamine. And whenever I do something pleasurable for the brain in a good way, such as I said, doing something that I like to do, I'm manually increasing the level of my dopamine. And consequently, after a week of doing jigsaw puzzle, then I see my
Mm.
focus is increased in other things. My
Mm.
attention is going to be increased in the other things rather than just jigsaw puzzle. So this is the good
Mm.
thing about the brain, which if you work on it, if you help it, it helps
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I'll double click on that piece for ADHD as well. And what's
you.
beautiful is about those motivator stacks that work really well for us as ADHD people. So activating curiosity, lifelong learning, or the transcendent emotional states. So joy,
Yes.
chasing new and novel experiences. I mean, often these are looked at as the weaknesses of ADHD, but I think what's really cool is when we double down on those and we understand the things that that activate us, actually we want to do it. So that's a motivating force within itself, where sometimes that consistency and attention can fall away. So we want to do it, which is great. But what I'm hearing you share, Shohreh, is that that's then activating more dopamine, and we're
Exactly.
teaching our brain really how to behave.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that brings me to my next question, because one of the pushbacks, I guess, that I hear a lot when it comes to healthy habit formation. So let's take, for example, someone's listening to this and says, yeah, you know what? I don't have an excuse. I really can fit half an hour a day in for my exercise, and yet I'm not, or insert whatever other healthy habit it is. So one of the things that we really struggle with as ADHD is that executive function that's around consistency. So consistency and putting things on repeat, that can be, I hear a lot of people describe it as almost painful to do something that they have to do. And I'm really curious to hear your cheats and your workarounds.
No, I know, like cleaning the room, it's boring, so I don't want to do
Oh
it.
yeah.
That's so boring. So yeah, no, that's absolutely, absolutely true and happening. And then there are actually ways to improve this situation. So I understand this is a very important element. And what I want to bring as an additional before I start going to the paths or the tools, the strategies that we can use, I just wanted to bring this important element of support. So for ADHD, that different spectrum of ADHD, support is a really important element. If I can say maybe 50%, that I'm not wrong. So for even if you're living alone, that doesn't mean that you don't need seeking any support.
Yeah.
Support doesn't just mean in personal life, support in personal life, professional life, support in support groups. So support is a very important element, because as important as the dopamine level inside your brain and the way that you internally making it elevated is, the other important element is the pushing from the outside. I don't want to call it pushing because it sounds like forcing, but support.
Accountability, like is it accountability? Yeah.
Yes, and
Yeah.
the way that people start sharing the things with each other, that you feel you are not alone in this way, and there are people coming to you and then they discuss this. Okay, that different individual experiences could be really, really helpful, because that person could be your support person in giving you some advice, and this person is the one who has ADHD. So who is better than this one? No physician could be better than this one, I'm telling you.
So
So she
true.
can give so she can give you some practical advice that, oh, you know what, I think it's not boring. Why don't you think it's not boring? Because I do this, I do that. She gives you some advice, you can give that person some advice about this. So those support groups are really important. That's what I want to emphasize in that support element. This is from the people, other people with ADHD. So I really always encourage them to go to find those groups which have similarities with them, and then they can just exchange the minimum thing is exchanging the experience. This is the minimum thing, and the minimum thing comes with a very outstanding outcomes. The other support is from the family. So if you have families, and then you have to bring the knowledge to the family that this is the situation, there is nothing wrong with that. If you're in a workplace, and actually that needs a bigger work on this, because
Conversation. You and I
definitely,
are going to get busy on that one, I think.
because that one is hopefully, unlikely it's going to be happen, but it needs some policy development, some guideline development, some workplace changes, and then some understanding for the co-workers. But these are the elements of the support. But from those apart from those elements, when it comes to you personally, yes, and I know it is going to be a little bit challenging at this stage, but for human kind, if I can call it in general, the way that we establish a habit for us is never easy. Even for the person who is not having ADHD, establishing a pattern requires changing the connections of the brains and making some new connections inside the brains. As I explained before, so we have neurons, and neurons always are in connection with each other. So if you want to develop a new habit and improve it, you need to make those connections, and then by the time you need to make those connections stronger and stronger by repeating that particular behavior. At the same time, you have to get rid of those connections which were made in your brain and made you feel it's boring. So
Yeah.
the unwanted connections should be disappeared while you make the new good connections, replacing those unwanted
And
connections.
that takes time
That
and
takes time. That takes
practice.
practice, time, and I can say discipline. And it is gonna be difficult. And this is again because of that dopamine. This is nothing personal or nothing, like as I call, like
It
some
is what
people
it is.
it
It's
is what it
biology.
is. It is
Yep.
exactly, it is what
Part
it
of it
is.
is that radical self-acceptance and awareness of my brain is built differently. I'm going to
Exactly.
need to wrap some accommodations and get creative
Exactly.
around how I get gritty.
That is
100%.
totally true. The way that I suggest, and it's working, well, scientific research show that it's working,
Mm.
is to always accompany that making new habit, cleaning your room, for example, with some pleasurable
Yes.
activities. This is the way that you can increase dopamine. If that activity, which sounds boring or not important, or you cannot focus on it for some reason, this is the one that you want to focus on it. Just accompany that one with something which you like. So again, as
Brilliant.
a person with ADHD, I don't like to clean my room because it sounds boring. But I like doing something else. For example, I like decorating the walls of my room with some particular pictures.
Oh,
Although
I'm hearing a whole bunch of ADHD people going, if I go to the picture decoration, that's going to be a whole day long project and my room is going to be messy. I'll give you a couple of hacks that I've been able to find. I think what you're referring to, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this is kind of like habit stacking, right? So create a habit that you already love to do that is already there. And so when we're
exactly,
talking about habits, we're just talking about behaviors. So take the hard out of the habit for a second. So I
exactly.
think the type of example that would work for me would be I've got to clean my room, don't want to do it today, boring. I could call a friend and give ourselves a half an hour call because I love talking to my friend and clean the room. I could listen to a podcast. I could listen to music. I could create a competition for myself. How quickly can I get all the socks into my sock drawer? I think that the interesting one, and I don't know what's going on in the brain, so I'd love to, maybe we can do a bit of research and circle back on this. But the interesting one is that task switching. So if it's the cleaning the room that's the boring thing, and then something becomes all of a sudden interesting, or a sock drawer that needs to be really tidily organized, and the ADHD's ability to go, that's the most important thing to do right now, not
No, no,
that.
that's
That is
really good
fascinating.
example. Exactly. That's a very good thing that you just said. Bring a
Mm,
reward to yourself. Just
yeah.
accompany this with some source of dopamine elevation. And
Yes.
this is the way that you're helping your brain to always, this is the first time, second time, third time, after maybe couple of months practicing, now cleaning your room associates with some reward. That means that
Mm.
cleaning your room, if I do it, I have dopamine release in my brain. I have the
Mhm.
pleasure sensible sense in my brain. That is good. So I will more motivated to go to do those kind of things. You know what I mean? So always accompany this with something that's gonna surge the level of dopamine in your brain.
I love this. This is brilliant. I run a program for women who have just been diagnosed with ADHD, often late in adulthood. And so
Yeah,
we go through all of these awesome tips and tricks. And as I'm hearing you speak, I love now that we can bring this back to the neuroscience and say, this is what's happening in the brain. So one, there's that radical acceptance and awareness of what's actually happening. And then two, getting creative around, how you can really habit stack your environment, the accountability piece, being okay to ask for support. It's a big one. And to your point, in workplaces, we've got a lot of work to do around disclosure and what that looks like, and how we can support people, employers, employees, everybody coming together to understand strengths and struggles
right.
and really
Yeah,
make sure that we thrive. On the other side of thriving, as we're coming, I know, towards the end of our conversation, there's a more serious side of brains when they start to really languish and they start to really struggle and suffer. And I work in the clinical psychology space and see how this presents with some of our mental illnesses like depression, like anxiety. And we're not going to get too clinical today, but one of the topics that's being talked about, and I know you're really passionate about in giving people preventative support structures, is around the idea of resilience, of stress training, but also buffering
definitely.
against burnout. What's going on in the brain when somebody experiences burnout? And I'm not talking like, oh, I don't really want to go to work today, I think I'll just have an RDO, a roster day off. I'm talking about where there's those physical nervous system responses, where there's that sense of cynicism and lack of motivation and a desire to withdraw. One, what is burnout? Two, why is our neurodivergent population so vulnerable to it? And three, what can we do to prevent it? Because treatment's a whole other conversation that I think we need to have a podcast for. What would be your insights around this important conversation to start with?
Sure. No, that's a very important aspect. It's just, as you said, it's just for the entire population, but also
Mm,
basically important when we discuss ADHD people. And the reason is, so for example, burnout usually happens when we are overwhelmed with the responsibilities,
yeah.
and we are under some pressures of doing something. One of the important thing is making decisions to do something. That decision could be at lower level, not that leadership or management, even that like as a normal employee going to work, I have to finish some job, I have to make some decisions about these ones, and I'm talking just about work environment, also in
Yeah.
personal life that could happen too. So I have under pressure of either time pressure or either work pressure or workload pressure to focus on something and to finish it something and to do some responsibility. I need to make some decisions, I need to make some plans to do it step by step. And sometimes it is going to be so much for one person. We are all human, we have to be flexible because that's the brain is flexible, we have to be flexible, the work environment should be flexible, that's important.
Mm,
But when we are not considering those elements and just stick to those expectations, some people, they may just find themselves under the pressure of planning, making decision, being focused so much, and then they cannot doing that one when burnout actually happens. For people
mm,
with ADHD, actually, it's going to be to another level because now
mm.
it comes to the a little bit of a lower level of dopamine and noradrenaline and everything that we discussed before, and then you have
Yeah.
this situation that you need to do the, like for example, a leader with ADHD, everybody expect that person to make big decisions,
Yeah.
like plan for the entire group, do this, do that, and then the person is under so much pressure with that high level of responsibilities.
Overwhelmed.
He's very smart, he can do that, but it's smartness doesn't have to do anything with that decision making in time. Smartness is the way that the brain works based on the experiences, bring the experiences and bring the abilities that is learned and combine it and make a decision. Now, to
Mm,
make that decision, now it goes to the other step, which is the dopamine thing. And because of
yeah.
the lack of dopamine or less level of dopamine, now decision making is a challenge. At higher level, it's going to show it out itself in a bigger scale. So the person is facing lots of huge responsibilities with lots of expectations in that particular amount of time, and that's causing the burnout. If we don't understand that situation in workplace, it's going to be really damaging to the leader
Mm,
and consequently to the lower levels which are under the supervision of that leader. So
mm.
that's why it's important to work on it, because that's usually there is no positive outcome from burnout.
Gosh, there's not. And the amount of time, the clinical care, having had the privilege to be alongside people who have experienced real burnout, and I would say I have to an extent, but not to the point where I've been out of work because of burnout for a period of time. It can impact people for 6 to 12, 18 months of a recovery. And I want to circle back to something that you shared earlier, because some patterns are clicking over for me. I think because we're going to get into quickly talking about some preventative measures, remembering again that norepinephrine role, so the filtering system for neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
So if you've got the cognitive load of tasks compounding over time, remembering that part of the executive function difference for ADHDers is sometimes impacting time perception. So there can be time optimism of how much we can achieve in a day, particularly if
Exactly.
you've then got personality stacked on top of that, right? Where you're either wanting to people please or where you're a high achiever. But if you've constantly got that environmental bombardment where your filtering system is therefore impacted, so your norepinephrine and your dopamine start to play in not so helpful ways, your serotonin is going to take a dive. This is where that intricate dance, it's really complicated. We have to respect and honor our brains to look
Exactly.
after them. So
Exactly.
tell us,
Yeah.
what can we do? Because caring for burnout is a whole other conversation. What can we do to go, okay, this is a real vulnerability. How can I take my brain and my body, my nervous system seriously to show up and continue performing and mitigate against the risk of stress and burnout? What would be some
Exactly.
tips?
And that's a good question. This is all start with overwhelming the person with lots of things. And the
Mm,
things that a person actually wants to do it, even if we don't have that abilities or that time or whatever to finalize that task, we push ourselves over the limit to just do it
mm,
somehow. And that comes with overwhelming with all of those challenges. And then burnout is the consequence. We are not getting any good outcome at the end of the day. So there are some works that we can do that should be done from the upper levels, and as I said, like the policy
yeah,
and
great.
the
Systems
different things.
based.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is actually very good because this conversation is happening at the moment. But back to maybe 50 years ago, actually working hard and pushing over a limit was considered as a very good a bonus for a person in a work environment. We should work on it as people who are advocate for the mental health, and then we can bring it to the idea of people who are making some regulations around the work. This should be limited, this should be considered, the ADHD situation should be considered at work. But personally, if you want to do something, my suggestion, and also the scientific results, the scientific studies show that you have to start always with a small, never start with a big. When you start with a small and start working one by one, one at a time, that makes it better. The people with ADHD, as I said, like because of those situations, they have a little bit of difficulties in planning and in making decision for future or planning. So what is planning? Planning is when I'm here, I think of 10 steps ahead. That is
Yeah.
planning. And for a person who is having ADHD, it is really difficult to figure it out, right? So this is the thing that could happen and help the person to work one at a time. So while you have the plan, and the plan has been given to you by your manager or whoever at workplace, you have to keep that plan, but don't think about 10 steps ahead. Just work on the first step. That actually takes the pressure out of your shoulder hugely. When you just focus at one step at a time, when that step finalized, go to the second step. This way, that is actually that is shown that you can eventually get to that final result without stressing yourself so much, because then you are just your brain is just focused on one thing at a time. That
Yeah.
solves the focus problem, that solves the planning problem, that solves making the decision for 10 steps ahead problem. Of course it needs practicing, because this is the way, this is the job of our brain, to always think about future. What if happens, what if happens, what if. So this needs practicing again. When you want to, next time when it comes to your mind that you start thinking about the end time, the due date, thinking about the entire project, pause yourself. That is practicing. Pause yourself and think about it. Okay, this is 10 steps. I forget about the other 9 steps. I
How do I
just work
break it
on
down?
this one. Exactly. Start
Yeah.
with small, break it down. And with each step that you finish, tap on your shoulder. Well done. I did it good. You reward yourself with
Reinforcement.
dopamine. Yeah, reinforcement, dopamine
Beautiful.
increase. And then go to the next step, finalize it, finish it, tap your shoulder. So this
Yeah.
way you help yourself to just go to the next step by increasing dopamine and by minimizing the distraction and helping yourself to focus on small things. So that's gonna help.
I love that executive aspect. I'd add to that as well. I think this is where knowing your unique brain and how it shows up in the world, particularly if you have a brain-based difference like ADHD, is just so important, because for different people, then different parts of their executive functions are impacted. So I know for myself, nonverbal working memory is really poor for me. I have to take photos of everything I do and everywhere I go. And so that idea of thinking forward into the future is something that I used to say before I treated my ADHD. I am time blind. I don't have a sense of the future. And so when I know that about my brain, then I put an accommodation in place. I have somebody who helps to keep accountable. Like, okay, great. I can break it down into those 1 out of 10 steps, and I just want to focus on one step. But I need somebody or a system. Lately, I've been using technology and ChatGPT, which is, again, there's a whole other podcast, to help me say, okay, but we only need to spend 1 hour on this task, Maz, because then we've got all of the others. So just focus on this task for the 1 hour, and then there's a bell going to go off, or somebody's going to come in and tell me. So those checkpoints, the accountability aspect, the chunking it down, they're great executive tasks. I would be so disappointed to get off this call, though, without asking you about nervous system care. So we know that, yes, we've got those cognitive functions for the executive brain to be able to break down, chunk things into pieces, time management. What about our bodies in terms of stress? What's going on, and how can we get ourselves into a good line? I know in science we'd call that homeostasis, but that balanced part of the brain and body where we feel like we're calm, we're connected, we're curious, everything's switched on. How can we exercise is one? We've talked about that. What are some other practices that you recommend?
Sure. That's a very good question. And just bring it back to your first question about neurotransmitters and chemicals. I just want to bring another hero in this, which is usually called as a bad guy, but he's not a bad guy. He's just another hormone, another neurotransmitter. It's called cortisol. So cortisol
Yeah.
is a hormone that we have in our body, and it is called a stress hormone. But maybe it has a bad reputation, poor thing. But it is actually it's very important. We cannot live without it at all. So
Mm.
cortisol is called a stress hormone because it's usually it's being released during a stress situation when we need
Mm-hmm.
to react to some particular unknown situation which came to our environment suddenly. For example, if you wanted to run after a bus to get to a job, to an appointment or something, the cortisol levels getting up a little bit to
Yeah.
make your body ready for that stressful situation. And this is actually normal and it's actually helpful because without that, you cannot run after the bus, you cannot catch the bus, and you will be possibly late for your appointment. So this
Mm.
is a good thing. But the stress thing, which is called chronic stress, and the stress that we don't want to have in our life, is when we
Mm.
have that cortisol level up all the time. Some people at
Mm.
workplace, if something happens and makes them stressful a little bit, they keep repeating it in their brains. That's why the
Mm.
stress system, the alarm system, is always on in their brain,
Mm.
and they're going
Mm-hmm.
through the stress situation, chronic stress, which is not good. It could affect your physical health, heart attack, stroke, different things. It could affect your mental situation and anxiety, long-term depression, different things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not good in any aspect, chronic stress. So how could you manage it? The best way to manage a stress in work situation is to awareness. I start always with
Mm.
awareness.
Yeah.
Stress situations, when they cause us discomfort, if I can say it in a word,
Mm-hmm.
the discomfort starts with a bad feeling. When you have a bad feeling about something, and for example, you see some reactions in the workplace, and that starts making you annoyed, you have this discomfort, right? So
Yes.
next time that happens in your life, family life, personal life, you need to be aware of it. By awareness
Mm-hmm.
is you need to observe your feeling, and that's the awareness.
Mm.
When it
Mm-hmm.
happens to you, stress happens to you, you feel so anxious, you start again talking about the event that happened 10 years ago. You need to pause for a second, pause it, and then observe your thought. Observe the thing that caused you stress at work, at family relationship, at everywhere. Something that caused you stress, observe it. What is
Mm.
this? Is it a fact or is it a fiction? Is it the thing
Yeah.
that is happening now or is it the thing that happened 10 years ago? Is it the my
Mm-hmm.
assumption from the behavior of my supervisor which annoys me, or is it actually the fact? Because most of the time the thing that causes stress is our assumption,
Mm.
perspective from that situation, which is not actually real. This is the recipe for stress management. I can say not even a stress
Mm.
cure, but a stress management. Pause it, watch it. What is happening now? Is it right? Is it actually happening? Am I true? Is it just my assumption? If it is your assumption, just forget about it. If it is
Mm.
real, which I guaranteed will not be more than 5%, 95% is your assumption, 95% is in the past, 95% never gonna happen in your life.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Just you actually simply remove that 95% from your life. You have lots of room for that only 5%. Gives the
Mm.
brain, the cortex, huge ability to be focused on what it actually needs to
In
do,
front of
right?
us. Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
because if you don't control your feeling, you cannot control your reaction, and that will add to that vicious cycle of anxiety.
And I'm thinking of sometimes what you do in that pause matters as well. So for those
Yeah,
of us who have got those super racy brains that I can hear saying, but my brain will not pause. Okay, so turn to your body. What can you do to be able to create some space? Can you
good,
take 3 deep breaths? Can you notice what's around you? Can you change your
amazing.
environment? Can you listen to some music? Can you talk to a friend? Sometimes it's changing the behavior as opposed to trying to work just on the thought that can give us that opportunity to have the space that I'm hearing you talk to. There's so much in that. Thank you, Shohreh. Oh my gosh, you've
Amazing.
been
No,
so generous with
you
your
just
wisdom
said
and your
it.
knowledge.
No, no,
Have you got time for some quick fire round questions?
sure, definitely.
What comes to your mind when you think of the words impact mindset? Somebody with an impact mindset, what qualities might they have?
I come to my mouth growth.
Beautiful. Inclusive impact?
Growth again.
Love that. The big question is, for you, what does it mean to live a meaningful life?
I really love to help people. I love human. I love people. I mean, I go outside and I see one person is eating ice cream. It's such a, pleasure. And I say, oh, this is so nice. This is something I think good with me, that I go outside and I see people, like I see people's face and I admire them. That's such an amazing creation of the universe. And that's why I really want to help them with any challenges that they're facing. If I can do it, it's my expertise, the level of expertise. So I really want to help them. And I think that is, at the end of the day, that is the meaning of your life. I know that we all have our families, we love our families, and we think, okay, at the end of the work, I come back to my family, and that's actually a very big part. We spend another, at least 1/3 of our lives with the other people who are not our families. When you're in one room with one person, you both breathe the same air. That means that you are breathing the air that she or he breathed before. And then you are bringing into your body. That will be the molecules, literally, will go to be a part of your body. That is how closely connected we humans to each other. You know what I mean?
That's
So if
beautiful.
I can do something for that person, or sometimes when I'm in a bus, I see the all or like in the airplane, you see, we are in one thing. What happens to one person here will happen to me. So we are so connected. You know what I mean? So
Mm.
that is really a good feeling. And then why should I forget about it and ignore it when I'm out of the bus, out of the airplane, when I'm out of the room? That person is now a little bit a part of me. I'm a part of him. If I can help him, if there is a situation that that person needs my anything that I have in my mind as a human, why shouldn't I bring it to him? Makes his life easier. If I've gone through like bad experiences, I won't let him or her to go through that bad experience. What's wrong with it? And imagine if people can do this to each other, that's a big help. That's actually improving everybody's life. And then I will enjoy my family life even more. So, and the other 8 hours I will be in sleep. So that's all.
Dr. Shohreh, I think even in your sleep, you're having a positive impact on the world with
Oh,
your
I love it.
gorgeous heart. Honestly, if I could bottle you and sprinkle your magic over the world, I just would. Thank you for gifting us so much time, so much wisdom, so much of, I mean, you just ooze optimism and positivity and hope for this planet. So I'm
Thank
just
you
so
so
very
much.
grateful for you and
Thank you
appreciative
so
of
much.
all that you've shared today. And for our listeners, thank you for listening in. And thanks again for your interest in inclusive impact. We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Classroom 5.0, our NeuroPeak series. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to check out the list of resources mentioned. Just hit the link in the show notes below. And hey, if this episode resonated with you, I'd love it if you could share it with a friend, leave a review, and make sure to follow the podcast so that you don't miss what's coming next. We've got a ripper of a lineup. For more on supporting your own neurodiversity journey, you can head on over to marianepower.com.au. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.